Let me start with a proper welcome. Welcome everyone, good morning or good afternoon, depending on from where you're tuned in. Welcome to another online event by Agora Energiewende. Today the topic will be Modernizing the European lignite triangle, implications of a coordinated lignite phase-out by 2032 in Germany, Poland and the Czech Republic. For those of you who do not know Agora Energiewende, we are a think tank financed by two foundations primarily, and we are working on making the energy transition a success, not just in Germany. We're currently some 50 colleagues working mainly from Berlin, but we also have offices in Brussels and Beijing. Today's event is hosted together with our partner organization or sister organization, Forum Energie, who works from Wholesale with some 12 members of staff. At the moment, I'm just checking my control monitor. You should only see my colleague Matthias Buck and me, Nicola Bock. I'm head of events at Agora Energiewende, and I'll be your host today, guiding you through the event. And Matthias, who's head of team Europe at Agora Energiewende, he will later on introduce you to our panel and then also take care of the Q&A session, which we'll have at the end of the webinar. Now, what's going to happen during the next 90 minutes? After welcoming, housekeeping, and of course another poll, because we like them so much, you will have a presentation and a comment of about 15 minutes, which will leave us some 30 minutes for Q&As. And then by 11:30, we should be finished. We're now in the housekeeping part, and I'd like to make you familiar with this online room for those of you who haven't joined one of our events before. We cannot see you, which is a shame, but at least you can interact with us. And there are two ways. You can use the chat window at the bottom of your screen for any technical issues. So in case you cannot hear us properly or your screen gets frozen or something, put this comment in there. It will only be visible for us panelists and we'll take care of it. We will also use it to inform you about relevant links. For instance, you can already find the presentation, which we will later show you, on our website. And I'm not sure, yes, my colleague Philip Litz has already communicated it to you, so you find the link, you can already download the presentation in case you face any internet connecting difficulties or so. If there's anything you want to let us know, you can put it in the chat as well, or use our email address webinar@agora-energiewende.de. And then the second window, which is probably even more important for you, that's the Q&A window, or F&A for Fragen und Antworten if you're tuning in from Germany. This is for your content-related questions. So anything that comes up to your mind during the presentation or the comment, put it in there. Matthias Buck will flick through it throughout the event and pick the ones later on and ask them on your behalf, so to say, to the panelists. And last but not least, we are recording this webinar because we would like to make it available also for everyone who cannot join right now. You see that at the top left of your screen. Right. One more thing before I hand over to Matthias, since we only see your names in our list of participants, but we do not see your faces. We have no idea where you're coming from. So we would like to make a poll with you to find out a little more about you. And I will start it. And you can answer it. Should be able to see it now. I will read out the questions because actually this is not being recorded. And also if you're tuned in from a browser only, you may not be able to see it. So from where are you tuned in? A, the Czech Republic, B, Germany, C, Poland, or D, other? And the second question is, which sector are you working in? Is it A, the energy sector, B, industry manufacturing, C, government regulator, D, science, E, NGO, or F, other? And you won't be able to see anything, but I am. And it looks like people have voted. So I will publish Hang on, the chat window is just hiding it. I will finish it so everyone can now see the results. And we see a majority of 69% attendees tuned in from Germany, 21% from other countries, and 6% from Poland, and 4% from the Czech Republic. And regarding sectors, we have 40%, which equals 27 persons from the energy sector, which is probably no big surprise. And then it's followed by other, 22%, NGOs, 13%, science, 6 persons from science, which is 9%, and then industry, manufacturing, and government regulator, 7% each. And with this hopefully slightly better idea about who we are presenting to, I now hand over to Matthias.
So thank you, Nicola, and a warm welcome from Berlin to you out there as well. Now let me introduce you to the panelists of today. We have 4 persons on the panel, and I will present them in order of their appearance. First, to speak is Joanna Markowiak-Pandera. She is the president of Forum Energie, our Polish partner think tank. And Joanna will introduce the background to the study as well as place its results in context. The second person to speak is Patrick Greichen. Patrick, can you turn on your video? Thank you. Patrick is the Executive Director of Agora Energiewende, and he will complement Joanna in placing the study into context as well as the results into context. The study as such and the most important results of the study will be presented by Hans König, who you should be able to see now. Hans is the head of commissioned projects of Central Europe at Aurora Energy Research, and Aurora Energy Research has done the substantive work in coming up with the results for this event. The last but not least on our panel today is Alexandra Tomczak. Alexandra is currently in the cabinet of Vice President Franz Timmermans in the European Commission, so directly at the heart of the EU-level debates on the European Green Deal. And Alexandra has agreed to comment on the study from a Commission perspective on the main messages from the study, as well as to place it into context of what it means in the now emerging debate on -55% increase of greenhouse gas reductions in Europe. Who you cannot see, but very important person in the background is my colleague Philipp Litz. He is our project manager, international cold transitions, and he is supporting myself and Nicola throughout this event today. So thank you, Philipp, for that. Now, without further ado, I hand over to Patrick and Joanna to kick off the presentation.
Before we start, I'm not sure, Nicola, are you having another poll?
We'll do that after your introduction.
Okay. So, welcome everybody from our side. We're happy to give you an introduction of our study on the European lignite triangle. We've been doing that together with Forum Energie, our partner in Warsaw, and very happy that Joanna is joining us here today. Next slide, please. So what is the background? You see here the coal production in Europe 2019, and the red bars are the lignite production. And you can clearly see that there is, within the European Union, basically 3 countries that are the large part of lignite, and that is Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic. There's also lignite in Romania, Bulgaria, and the Balkan region. Some left in Greece, some in Turkey. That's basically then the other part where there is lignite in Europe left. But the main bulk, if you add the red elements, you find out it is Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic that produce more than 2/3 of lignite in Europe. And of course, we all know that lignite is the most CO2 intensive fuel that is out there. So whenever talking about climate policy in Europe, we need to talk about lignite. Next slide. So what we wanted to know is how does one approach the whole lignite story? And we know that there are several elements out there that need to be faced. First, there is a gap in coal resources, and there is power plants that are coming to the end of their lifetime. So there is the need for new low carbon capacities. Second, and that is obviously these days the most important issue, the EU is going to raise its 2030 targets. It already has decided upon climate neutrality. So lignite is the most CO2 intensive fuel, and it doesn't have a future in the long run. The question is, when in the medium term will it be gone? Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic are closely interlinked, also when it comes to electricity imports and exports. And this is why it is necessary to analyze them together and not just separately. And we have seen in the past 12 months how rising CO2 prices have already been putting coal and lignite under pressure. So with CO2 prices nearly 30 euros per ton of CO2, the old business as usual scenarios depicting that we would be using lignite well down the 2030s and even the 2040s are not valid anymore. With higher CO2 prices, this becomes unprofitable. And we've seen that the transformation has started. The discussion in Germany has been going on for the past years. There's the same discussion now in Poland, and in the Czech Republic, a coal commission has been set up. So this is an issue that is hotly debated in all three countries. And that is why, together with Forum, we have been looking at those three countries and their lignite issue. And I'd like to hand over to Joanna to introduce you to the study.
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome everybody. It's my pure pleasure to be today with you, and I'm really pleased that we did the study together. It was long debated how to do it and if it's the topic for now. I think that a few words from my side. So I think that Poland and Germany are two big coal brothers in Europe. Basically, I see that coal is perceived as elephant in the room in those countries. I think Czech Republic is also very relevant in that context because our systems are interconnected. But nevertheless, Poland and Germany still play a key role when it comes to the decarbonization in Europe. The situation in Poland is quite interesting. So, contrary to Germany and Czech Republic, we do not have a coal commission yet, or maybe we will never have. But nevertheless, the discussion on the coal phase out already started. Particularly last year's the ETS has pushed out of the system the oldest coal-fired power plants, and the pandemic and decreasing demand only speeded up the process. And on top of this, you have the discussion that open lignite deposit are about to finish in the next 10-12 years. This is something which is not decided yet. Still, there are several decisions which are considered by the PGE, which is the biggest Polish utilities. However, it's very unlikely that it will happen. I mean, new mines and continuation of the lignite production because of strong opposition of local societies and basically lack of money for such kind of investment. So this is something where I think that it's really important to openly talk about how to prepare the system, energy system, for such a big change, because it means that in the next 10-12 years, 8 gigawatt of lignite capacity will fall out the Polish power system. On top of this, there is also consideration about hard coal-fired power plants, which also be to some extent phase out. And I think that the German-Polish debate is very important because I see actually dealing with energy and climate policies for 15 years. I see the struggle between Germany and Poland, who will phase out coal first. And what Germany will do, it's a really big subject of the debate in Poland, and the same in Germany. Germany is looking into the direction of Poland, what Poland will do. So this is the intention of the study, was to exactly put on the table this issue. We know that the systems are regional. What Patrick said, we are interconnected. There are price effects. We are like interconnected vessels. Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, but also Sweden, Lithuania. So everything is interconnected and everything impacts everything, which means that the objective of our analysis, and we thought it's very interesting, was to cover security of supply issue and to check what does it mean in the context of simultaneous coal phase out in Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic. Once we talk about Green New Deal, once we talk about more ambitious energy emissions reduction target, which probably will be presented tomorrow, we see that this is obvious need to talk about how to speed up the coal phase out process. So in that context, security of supply is important, electricity trade balance and electricity flows, and interactions between emissions and what does it mean, this coal phase out in terms of emission reduction and the wholesale electricity prices and overall costs for the entire system. Next slide, please. And our approach was to develop first reference scenarios for Germany, Czech Republic, and Poland. Basically, we took official government strategies which are viable. We make them comparable. So small adjustments took place. I think Hans eventually may add to this, or you can read it in our analysis because it's detailed described. And then we developed 2 scenarios of lignite phase out, 2032 and 2035, which you can see is actually earlier than Germany assumed. And we basically analyzed the technological and economic conditions and everything what will happen in the triangle countries, what will happen on the national basis and how the system will interact and what does it mean in terms of prices and emissions. And we did detailed modeling, hourly simulations of the system and based on cost optimization principle. Next slide, please. It basically describes this scenario, I mean, the starting point in each country. So Poland is now in the phase when last week the new assumptions for the state energy policy were published. It's still a step forward, but it still actually does not envisage more advanced emission reduction targets. We didn't take into account nuclear power, even if it's because it's sometimes it's part of the state energy policy, sometimes not. Currently it is, but nevertheless it's very delayed and unlikely that within 15 years nuclear power plant will be built in Poland. And then in Germany we took basically the recommendations of the Coal Commission and with specific numbers, and in Czech Republic we took National Energy and Climate Plan and capacity planning made by biggest Polish utility. And maybe last comment from my side before I hand over to Hans is that I think that just transition discussion very advanced recently. So we have already fund, just transition fund, we have the discussion, we have basically territorial plans which each country should prepare. So I think the really big progress on the side of the, when talking about social dimension of phasing out coal, what is still missing is what does it mean for the adequacy and for the grids and for security of supply, and also what does it mean in terms of costs. So this is something where I think more light is needed, and with that I would like to hand over to Hans. Thank you.
Actually, I think there will be a poll, right, before I get to start.
Correct, exactly. Let me show you our second poll on your opinion on earliest phase-out date and biggest challenges. I will start the presentation, sorry, the vote, and you should be able to see it right now. I'll read out the question once more. What is the earliest date a lignite phase-out in Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic seems achievable to you? A, after 2035, B, by 2035, C, by 2032, D, before 2032. You can see people are voting while I will read out the second question, which is, in your opinion, what is the biggest challenge when phasing out lignite and coal early? Is it A, keeping costs as low as possible? Is it B, ensuring security of supply? Or is it C, making it a just transition? Okay. There's still some movement, so apparently people are still voting. And since that's one of the only ways of being activated and actually moving while sitting in front of the screen, I'd rather let them do it. But now it looks like people have made up their mind, and I will finish and make it visible for you. And we see there is a majority, 43%, which are 32 persons who think, or for whom it seems achievable a phase out from lignite by 2032, followed by 23% who actually think it's achievable before 2032, 19% by 2035, and 16% by 2035. And the biggest challenge for 45% of you, so 34 persons, is ensuring security of supply, followed by 35% who think that making it a just transition is the biggest challenge, and 20%, so every fifth of you, think that keeping costs as low as possible is the biggest challenge. Now, Hans, I hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much, and actually very impressive results. When we designed these scenarios a bit more than a year ago, I actually thought the 2032 is pretty ambitious, but looking at the poll results, actually, it looks as if perhaps we should have gone for a 2030 scenario. So the world is changing quite rapidly. Excellent, thank you very much. So what I would like to do in the next half hour or so is take you through the key results of the 3 countries we covered. And I will start with Germany, where we'll first see the generation mix in the country. And before I go through the details here, maybe to follow up on one point that Joanna made just now, on the evolution of the system, what we assumed in the reference scenario. You see the reference scenario here. We started with kind of government policies and stated goals, but then what we do in all our modeling is we add an economic dimension to it. So we basically ask the model, is it economic to build more capacities beyond the political dimension, or what will be supported politically? Do the capacities that are in the market cover their fixed costs? If not, they are shut down and so forth. So it's not a pure political scenario, but what we always do is we essentially look at whether it's viable from an economic perspective, and whether more things should be built beyond what the government is foreseeing in their policies, or existing capacities should go out earlier. So these are basically policy / economic scenarios of the long-term evolution of the system. So in the reference case for Germany, we based this, as Joanna said, on the co-commission proposals and the long-term targets for renewables shares by the government. So we're reaching a 65% renewables share by 2030 and an 80% share by 2040. This is, by the way, not to say that current government policy is sufficient to actually achieve these targets. There's a very live debate in Germany over the adjustments of CFD or renewables auction quotas, and we think actually they need to be increased quite a bit more than what the government is planning to, simply because electricity consumption will be on a rather upwards trajectory, as you can also see on this chart, but that's another debate. So the big trends we see emerging in the reference scenario is that coal is out of the system by 2038, or the end of 2038. Actually, even towards there, a lot of the decline happens over the next couple of years, when around 10 gigawatts of capacity will leave the system by 2023, and of course, nuclear also leaves the system by 2023. So 2023 is really quite an important year for the German power system. This is mostly replaced actually by renewables. So if you look at the yellow bars here, which represent CCGTs, or the orange ones, gas plants, they increase a little bit, but not massively. The big increases are in intermittent renewables, offshore wind, onshore wind, and also solar, to finally achieve 80% share of gross generation by of gross demand by 2040. Next slide, please. Looking at the scenario and looking at the switch towards renewables, it's unsurprising to see that emissions go down. In this reference scenario, we have them declining from around a bit less than 300 million tons of CO2 now to about 120 by 2040. Actually, one important thing to notice that we modeled this pre-COVID, so actually, actual 2020 will probably actually be quite a bit lower than this, but of course that's nothing structural, but rather a one-off effect, and we would expect to come back to the trajectory we were seeing before COVID pretty soon. And also, perhaps unsurprisingly, the phase-out scenarios which we modeled, the 2035 and the 2032, in terms of the long-term emissions they achieve, actually they come out in about the same place, which is what we would expect, because of course in all the three scenarios in 2040 there isn't any coal left. But what we are seeing is that these emission savings can be achieved quite a bit more quickly than under the Coal Commission compromise or proposal. So what we are actually seeing here is between the reference case and the 2032 scenario, cumulative additional savings of more than 400 million tons of CO2. Which is about 1.5 times annual emissions, and of course that's what matters for the climate. It's not the it's not the snapshots in any given year, but actually it's the cumulative emissions that are pumped into the atmosphere. Maybe one other comment here, and this is also actually to do with the implementation of the coal exit. So we follow the Coal Commission proposal here in terms of the capacity timelines. What the government is now actually implementing into law would actually lead to a higher emissions trajectory towards 2038 than the one we are seeing here, because there was a shift from hard coal to lignite, and the more emissions intensive lignite plants get to stay open longer than the hard coal plants. So the current government plan is even a bit above our reference scenario in that regard. Cool. Next slide, please. What we see here is the electricity trade balance, so the net imports or exports in the electricity wholesale market. Germany right now is a net exporter of electricity, 20 to 30 terawatt hours over the next couple of years. This is essentially driven by generally lower wholesale prices than the neighboring countries, which are mostly driven by a higher renewables share. As nuclear and the first coal plants are phased out towards the mid-20s, we see this balance shifting. So Germany, for a couple of years, becomes a net importer of electricity. But then, as more and more renewables are added under this, under both reference scenario and the phase-out cases, the export balance shifts back towards net exports, actually quite substantially. So the differences between the scenario, between the individual scenarios, aren't that big. I mean, this is in the grand scheme of things pretty negligible. Next slide, please. This slide shows us the evolution of wholesale electricity prices. So again, I would say the big headlines here are there's not a lot of difference between the scenarios. What we definitely don't see is that closing lignite earlier will lead to a lot of huge price spikes if this electricity or if the generation capacity we're taking out is replaced in some way, and as we assume for this scenario, they're replaced by renewables. Why is this the case? And this is perhaps a slightly methodological discourse, but it's important to understand the results. So if we're closing lignite, we're taking out something that has a positive marginal cost from the merit order of generation capacities. Actually, lignite marginal costs are mostly driven by the cost of carbon emissions. Generating 1 megawatt hour of electricity from lignite creates about 1.1 tons of CO2, and with rising carbon prices, this gives lignite an ever increasing marginal cost in the wholesale market. And if we take out the lignite and replace this by renewables, we are putting in new capacities that have a marginal cost that is close to zero. So it's not even a one-to-one exchange of replacing them by something of a similar cost in the wholesale market, but actually we're replacing them by a technology that has a lower short-run marginal cost and will therefore put downward pressure on prices. But of course, wholesale prices only give a part of the picture. So what's really important is to look at system costs, which we see on the next slide. And here, the main takeaway actually is that the differences between the scenarios aren't that significant. If anything, in most years, the phase-out scenarios are even a little bit cheaper. The general decreasing trend we are seeing, so system costs going from the mid-50s to the 35 to 40 billion euro mark, is mostly driven by the first generation of renewables capacities leaving the leaving the EEG subsidy scheme. So basically leaving they currently receive very high subsidies, and once they leave the 20 years for which they get subsidies, that part of the system cost is dropping. What we do not include here is the grid costs, simply because it wasn't the focus of the study. However, the individual scenarios would ultimately require the same grid, because by 2040 they have to operate by something like 80% renewables, and something like 80% renewables and without coal. So if anything, the only difference is between the scenarios is when the grids have to be built. And I'm seeing some comments here. I have to close the window because the kids in the kindergarten, which is in the bottom of the building, just went to the playground, and apparently that can be heard pretty loudly. So I hope it's better now. Excellent, great. So takeaway on the system cost, no big differences. If anything, the earlier phase-out scenario is a bit cheaper, and the grids you need for the systems are essentially the same. The question is just when you have to expand the grids, and that would have to take place a bit sooner in the earlier phase-out scenarios. Okay, next slide, please. And that takes us to Poland. If we look at the generation mix there, it's actually quite interesting because, as I said, we did the modeling for this or started the modeling for this about a year ago, when Polish government policy was a lot less ambitious than it is turning out to be now. And the Polish government, they last week released a new draft of their energy policy towards 2040, in which they are projecting levels of coal power generation, which are remarkably similar to what we have in this study by 2040. And this is something that would have been unthinkable even a year ago, and certainly 2 years ago. So that's really a big shift in how the government is thinking about this, and is coming to terms with the changing economics of coal in the power system. So what are the big trends? The big trends is obviously, yes, strong decline in both coal and lignite generation. This is replaced partly by natural gas. So one of the peculiarities of the Polish market design is that there is a capacity market, which ensures that as coal leaves the system, a lot of new dispatchable capacities are built, and a lot of them will either be combined cycle gas turbines or open cycle gas turbines, gas peakers, and they will be generating quite a bit of the electricity that would have come from coal, obviously leading to some emission savings, but not as significantly as switching to renewables outright. We're also seeing quite a strong increase in renewables generation from both offshore wind, onshore wind, as well as solar, and most of this is subsidy free. So we don't assume the Polish government in the reference scenario to continue CFD auctions beyond the ones that have been announced. For onshore we did for solar, for offshore we assume there will be political support. So actually, all the onshore wind and solar you are seeing built post 2025 or so is subsidy free and doesn't cost the taxpayers or the electricity consumers anything. So even in this not very ambitious policy scenario, there's a strong shift away from coal and towards renewables and gas. And this next slide, please, has quite strong implications on the emissions performance. So we're going from, so the top line you're seeing is what the Polish government submitted in the National Energy and Climate Plan, while the bottom three are the reference scenario and the phase out scenarios. And here you actually see what I was just referring to. So the last year's Polish energy policy draft foresaw a lot less ambitious emissions decline than we are expecting in our reference scenario. This year's Polish energy policy draft is actually very close to the red line, which we are projecting here. In the phase-out scenarios, of course, the declines come faster, and the declines go deeper. There's cumulative emission savings between the 2032 case and the reference case of more than 150 million tons of CO2, which is more than the annual, more than one time the annual emissions of the Polish electricity system. So quite substantial. Next slide, please. The electricity trade balance is something quite interesting, and it's something that has been politicized quite a bit in the Polish debate over the past years. So traditionally, Poland was a net exporter of electricity, had a somewhat lower wholesale price level than most of its neighboring countries. Through the increase of the European carbon price in the ETS over the past couple of years, this flipped, and Poland became quite a substantial importer of electricity, a net importer of electricity. We see this general trend more or less continuing. So Poland always remains a net importer in this time frame, in these scenarios. To what extent it remains that, however, is mostly driven by the amount of renewables that are added to the system and that are replacing coal. So here you see the red line in the reference scenario. Actually, the net imports they peak again in around 2030 above 11 terawatt hours per year, while it's in the phase out scenarios they actually reasonably close to zero, at 6 terawatt hours per year. So in the political discussion, I think it's important to realize that that renewables are a domestic source of energy, of electricity, and that building them can make a very substantial contribution to achieving a balanced electricity trade balance, and that is especially so if all the neighboring countries are pursuing ambitious renewables policies, as for instance Germany is, because this will always depress German wholesale prices below Polish ones if Poland doesn't respond. Next slide, please. On the wholesale electricity prices, here we see quite a strong, well, actually quite a clear downward pressure on prices from adding renewables. It's in overall magnitude, it's not that big, but it's quite it's quite obvious that that the pressure from adding renewables is downward, and this is a stronger effect than in Germany. It's a bit weaker than in the Czech Republic, where we see the strongest downward pressure on wholesale prices, and that has to do with the level of penetration of renewables. The first renewables you add to a system will put the strongest downward pressure on prices, while as you build more and more, and this effect gets weaker essentially, because there's more kind of a cannibalization. Germany, even in the reference scenario, has quite a high share of renewables, while Poland doesn't, and hence we are seeing a strong downward effect on the wholesale prices from phasing out lignite earlier. The general price level, maybe just to finish up on that note, is a bit above what we see today. This is at least in the longer term. This is essentially driven by, on the one hand, higher gas prices, and on the other hand, higher carbon prices, which we are expecting in the long term, and these determine the marginal costs of the thermal plants that will continue to set the price in the wholesale market for a very long time. Okay, next slide, please. On the system cost side, again, I won't go through all the details here, but it's actually there aren't any substantial differences. Is the main takeaway? It's all kind of within a couple of $100 million euros. So from a cost perspective, I think it's clear to say that that coal can be or lignite can be phased out in Poland. It's more about the political processes around that rather than an affordability issue. Next slide, please. And this takes us to the Czech Republic. The Czech generation mix is remarkably different from the two countries we've seen so far, mostly for the reason, or mostly for what you see in the red bars here, which is which is nuclear. We assume in this scenario that the lifetimes of the existing nuclear plants will be extended past 2040. This is actually a live debate at what cost this is possible. So there may be a world in which this isn't possible. But we do not assume the construction of new nuclear. You can find some of the reasons in the study. Simply, we don't find it cost competitive, and also in the kind of time frame you would need to build them, these plants, to replace lignite as it drops off from the mid-2020s. Nuclear projects simply cannot be realized in this kind of time frame. So these are the two main reasons why we don't include it in this scenario. Lignite, as I said, is dropping off pretty quickly after 2025 and then reaches a level of around 8 terawatt-hours, which is only really the two newest plants remaining in operation, and all the older ones having retired. This gets replaced to some extent by gas-fired power generation, but also by some renewables, especially onshore wind. So, and this, again, as in the Polish case, is subsidy free, is delivered on the basis of the value of the electricity in the market, rather than by subsidies by the government. So this is this is what we see happening here from around 2030 onwards. Actually, onshore wind starts making quite a substantial contribution. The import balance shifts from the Czech Republic being a net exporter to being a net importer, which reflects a higher wholesale price level than in some of the neighboring countries, especially Germany, which is adding so many renewables and hitting 80% by 2040. Next slide, please. Emissions in the Czech system already are reasonably low, which of course is a function of nuclear playing quite a big role. And as the lignite leaves the system, or lignite generation reduces, even in the reference case, that further decreases and more than halves by around 2035. In the phase-out cases, we again halve the emissions, the annual emissions of the power sector to below 10 million tons of CO2. These then predominantly come from cogeneration plants, combined heat and power, which run when renewables and nuclear aren't sufficient to meet demand. The cumulative savings between the two scenarios are almost 100 million tons, or almost 3 times the annual power sector emissions by 2040, which really is quite a remarkable saving. Next slide, please. In the trade balance, as I said, in the reference case, we see the Czech Republic shifting towards becoming a net importer by 2030. This is balanced out by the renewables that are added in the phase-out cases. And in both the 2035 and the 2032 phase-out, the trade balance is more or less balanced. And this comes back to the point which I just made in the Polish case, that renewables are a domestic source of energy, and tapping the source will tend to be good for the trade balance and for energy independence. Next slide, please. Here in the wholesale electricity prices, we again see what we are seeing or what we were seeing in Poland. So a downward effect on prices. Only that it's actually a lot stronger. So wholesale prices in the phase-out cases are €8 below the reference scenario, and this comes back to the fact that we are replacing some capacities with a positive marginal cost with capacities that have a zero marginal cost, and we're starting with a very low penetration of renewables in the system, so they have quite a they relatively have quite a big impact. Next slide, please. From a system cost perspective, again, it's a similar story to the other countries. If you look at it in relative terms, there's for the Czech Republic, it becomes the clearest that there is a downward pressure on costs on system costs from phasing out lignite. So if you look at 2040 here, both the 2035 and the 2032 phase-out scenarios are more than 10% below the reference scenario when it comes to system costs. So this would be saving the consumer money to do this kind of policy and help affordability. Right, the next slide brings it together on my end before I hand back the virtual microphone, as it were. What are the main lessons and conclusions we see emerging from the study? On the one hand, we quite clearly see that phasing out lignite in Europe's lignite triangle affords an opportunity to significantly reduce power sector emissions, about 50% from today's levels in the more ambitious scenario, while also reducing or at least keeping the same system costs and therefore not hitting consumers in any way, or potentially even benefiting them. The main thing that needs to happen for this to take place, for this development, is from our perspective political leadership and guidance, because clearly there are matters to be considered in phasing out lignite, which we in a power systems model cannot cover, such as what is the processes and the planning procedures around closing lignite mines and plants. What is the environment for a just transition, and how do you get the workers on board, and how do you create an investment environment in which renewables can be built, for instance, through CFD auctions. So these are then all the supplementary political decisions which I think need to be tackled in the next couple of months and years. But from an electricity markets perspective, there's nothing holding this back.
Thank you, Hans. So Patrick and Joanna, you want to summarize from your perspective?
Thank you very much, Matthias. A short summary from my side. So what you could see basically is that the decline of lignite is inevitable because of cost reasons, but also and above all in such countries as Poland because of resource reasons like depletion of existing mines and lack of consensus to open new ones. What we would like to say with the study, it's not a very easy task and nothing will happen, but the study says that the security of supply in the region can be kept, can be ensured, even if we speed up the phase-out process. However, the whole entire energy transition requires a plan, action plan, which should be started actually now in all the countries touched by our analysis. And what is also very relevant, that moving away from lignite could reduce CO2 emission reductions by 50% from the power sector in the region. So it's a lot, and I think it's huge contribution to the 2030 targets, and it could be one of the EU flagship initiatives. And I also would like to add last point that the coordination and cooperation and more transparency between Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic, Czechia is needed. And I hand over to Patrick.
Yes, thank you. Maybe a few observations also from our side. Now, first, what I found very interesting from the analysis that Hans presented is that the system costs of those three scenarios were all very close in all of the three countries. So a faster lignite phase out than currently planned in the baseline scenario will not lead to higher system costs for those three countries. And even the difference between 2035 and 2032 was in all three scenarios more or less nil. It was even a bit lower into 2032 scenario in I think the countries. So we don't have a cost issue when it comes to system cost due to lignite phase out, and of course the main reason is that carbon prices are increasing. So that is, I think, a key takeaway. And the second discussion that we always have in Germany, but the same as in Poland, and I believe also in the Czech Republic, is if we phase out, then we import coal from the neighbor. And it's exactly the same story on both sides of the border. But essentially, the story is the more renewables you build, the less you are dependent on imports. And I guess that is also the main takeaway from Hans' analysis. If you want to reduce electricity imports, just build wind and solar. Last remark, this is, of course, an issue where the three countries need to cooperate, because an alignment of strategy is necessary. If one country phased out and the other didn't, then trade flows would be different. And of course, the issue of the role of gas is important, as we are now seeing with the whole debate on the gas pipelines in Nord Stream 2. This is a highly political issue in all countries, and I guess the question of the role of gas in a faster coal phase-out scenario is the one which is next to just transition, the political element we need to worry about. It's not system costs and it's not security of supply. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna and Patrick. Before we open for broader question, can I just go back to you, Joanna and Patrick, and just ask from your national perspective, Joanna, you in Poland, and Patrick, you on Germany, and perhaps Alexandra, as part of your broader comments, the European implications. So what is your major takeaways for the domestic debates that are unfolding in Poland, in Germany, in Brussels on the lignite phase-out? Joanna, do you want to start?
Quickly from my side, the takeaway for Poland is that the issue of lignite need to be addressed in the state policy. And there is a difference between lignite and hard coal phase out or use, because still hard coal can be imported. So once the resources are not viable anymore, which is also the case. So Poland discusses now mining strategy, which means basically mining closures. So it's very hot and political topic, very sensitive. But the takeaway is lignite is something which is inevitable. It's not politically driven. It's mainly because of depleted resources, and this is something which pushes for energy transition and just need to be seen by politicians. It's unfortunately still not the case. So you see attempts of decision makers to address that issue, but it's still not the case. And we see that from the power system perspective and power system balance, it might be the issue in 10 years' time. So we need to prepare generation, energy efficiency probably as well, for that change. And that's from my side.
Thank you, Joanna. And Patrick, of course, some of the findings don't square fully with the German coal phase-out pathway as agreed politically, no?
Yes. Well, it is a bit strange that we've just passed a law for a coal phase-out in 2038. And obviously, when looking at the European discussion, a higher climate target 2030, it is inevitable that the coal phase-out will be faster. And what we've seen here is a coal phase-out 2032 is perfectly viable. And I think we will have that debate starting, I'd say, next year. So next year is elections in Germany, and I expect a faster phase-out driven probably mainly just by rising CO2 prices is on the agenda in the elections next year here in Germany.
Thank you. Alexandra, do you want to place in context the results from a Brussels particular Commission perspective?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Matthias. And I think this was an extremely interesting study. The results, as was commented by Patrick and others before, are extremely encouraging to see that the impacts on system costs, on security of supply, are essentially not there anymore. And I think from the energy and climate policy perspective debate in Brussels, it is also important to underline how much the world has actually changed over the past 10 years. Over the past 10 years, we have seen renewables becoming the cheapest option for power generation in almost every member state in the EU, which is probably why we can see such encouraging results from this study. But as you probably know, the European Commission will be proposing a plan for becoming more ambitious with our climate targets. We will propose a climate target plan this week with a more ambitious target for 2030. And essentially what that means is that we will have to accelerate the decarbonization of the power sector, among others. Of course, every other sector will have to contribute. But the power sector still representing the energy system still representing 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions of the EU definitely will have to play a bigger role. So from that perspective, the study is really great in showing that this acceleration can actually happen from a technology perspective, definitely without impacts on costs. But my second point, and here I was a little bit surprised, I must say, with the results of the polls, is we know we can do it from, let's say, a technical perspective. Won't be easy, as Joanna said, but we can do it. But from the just transition perspective, have we actually figured out already how this can be done in these three countries? And of course, the debates are happening, they are accelerating, even in places like Turów in Poland, Karlovy Vary, Ústí, Lausitz, all these, let's say, the bordering coal regions have really accelerated their discussion. But I think this is really still the most challenging part of this accelerated lignite phase out that you presented here. Well, we have proposed tools, the Just Transition Mechanism, the Just Transition Fund, with which we want to mobilize up to 100 billion euros of investments in those regions. So this will be part of the answer, but we need much more than resources. We need communities in those regions to come on board. It is increasingly becoming the case in some of the regions. We see the example of a small lignite mining region in Poland called Konin in Wielkopolska region, where the momentum for the phase out is actually growing, even among those who are employed. They understand in the coal mining sector, they understand that this is coming. But very recently, only over the last 2 months, I would say, or a month, we have seen strikes on the Polish side of this lignite mining basin in Turów in favor of keeping lignite mining. We saw strikes on the Czech side against the extension of that lignite mining. We have seen strikes in Bełchatów lignite mining basin also in favor of keeping it. So there is a very strong social, I would say, you know, a very strong social idea about within the communities what should be happening to their future. So we definitely have to make this transition just as the executive vice president says, or otherwise it won't be happening. So it can be let's say the stumbling block on this path towards quicker phase out. But we definitely want to put all the tools and resources in place so that it doesn't have to be a blocking issue. And I just wanted to just say at the end of these comments that it was really great to see this triangle approach across how a coordination can be carried out or helpful among different member states. I think that's an excellent idea because we will need more cross-regional dialogue between these 3 member states on the issue of the future of coal and lignite in particular, because you cannot expect one member state to phase out and on the other side of the border mining is still, let's say, continuing and there are new mines. This will be perceived as injustice. So definitely more coordination here will be needed. And if I can just based on the map that you have showed at the beginning of this webinar, suggest that maybe one day you could tackle the lignite rectangle between between Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece. That would also be, I think, a helpful element in this discussion. So, yeah, thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Alexandra. So I'm keeping track of your questions. And most of the questions so far are of a technical nature, and perhaps so probably Hans, it's for you to respond primarily. One question which I have on my mind, which I believe Alexandra also was alluding to, Hans, if you can just summarize from your perspective the scenario setting used for the study. How does it relate to the increased ambition debate that is now taking place in Brussels, where we expect Ursula von der Leyen tomorrow to announce an increase of the EU climate target? That's a question I believe many have on their minds. It has not yet been asked, but it's something I think important for the debate here. A second question, I think related to this is, Hans, do you have a figure on the cumulative CO2 savings for the 2032 phase-out scenario?
Yeah, thank you very much, and of course, very relevant questions. So on the first one, what we assume for these scenarios is that is the current design of the ETS in particular. So a 40% target reduction target by 2030 versus 1990 across sectors, 43% reduction within the ETS. Compared to 2005. So this doesn't yet include the European Green Deal. And I think that's an important thing to note when looking at these scenarios. How would the European Green Deal change this? I think a simple way of putting it is that it would essentially pull the 2040 results forward to something like 2030. So the overall the development which we are projecting in these scenarios in a 20-year time frame would rather take place in a 10-year time frame with all the needs for adjustment and transformation and just transition and so forth, and that it really amplifies the role that politics has to play there in managing this process, because 10 years isn't a lot of time. So it wouldn't change anything drastic, but it would in terms of the outcome, but it would. Of course, by 2040, we will then be much further along a European Green Deal, but it would compress the time frame in which the transition needs to take place. So I think that's the answer to the first question. To be honest, the overall savings I've never actually calculated, but I can flick through now. So it's 410. That's 570. So it's 600, around 660, 670 million euros across the three countries if you add these up.
Yes, thank you.
Matthias, I would like to jump in on the first question. So what would the minus 55% target mean? In essence, a coal phase out 10 years earlier, more or less, that's what Hans said, is then also what we analyze in the 2032 scenario. So one can, in a way, take the higher EU target and the 2032 scenario, and that more or less matches.
Okay. I'm jumping to another question. It's to Hans, but perhaps it's something to be commented on by Joanna and Patrick. Hans, the figures, it's a question by Henning Wiegand. The increase in renewables in the modeling, is this a model-driven exercise only, or is it also taking into account the acceptance of renewables, and perhaps Joanna and Patrick commenting from your perspective on the proposed increases in renewables and acceptance debates in Poland and Germany, vice versa.
Maybe I'll start with the technical answer as to what we did. So we checked these, we checked the capacities we have in these scenarios against potentials for renewables build-out, which were identified or actually researched in quite a bit of detail by the Joint Research Center on behalf of the European Commission. And we are well within the ranges which that study identified as what could be built physically within these countries. And of course, there comes a question to what is politically acceptable, and that is, of course, not something that you can quantify in a hard way, because that's a soft target. However, my impression of this, and I'd be interested to hear Patrick's and Joanna's views on this, is that actually the acceptability debate is moving forward a lot. So if you take the example of Poland. Poland currently has this 10H distance rule, so it's minimum distance requirement for new wind parks. The government tabled a proposal to reduce this to 500 meters, I think. I think it is, which leads to massively larger available potentials, and then rather taking other measures than pure distance to ensure that the acceptability by the local population, such as allowing them to partake economically and so forth.
So maybe a short comment from my side on top of what Hans said. It's indeed an important question, the acceptance. I think that we are not there yet where Germany is with the discussion about acceptance. So still, once you see the polls, actually Polish people, they really love renewables. This is particularly recently because of very good subsidy scheme for rooftop PV. So the PV share is now tremendously fast growing. Also, utilities going in the large scale PV farms. So when it comes to the PV, the acceptance is rather, it's like love. It's not acceptance. Everybody wants to have PV. When it comes to the onshore wind, this is important. What Hans said, indeed, the government 4 years ago introduced this distance regulation rule, which was rather political than pure, resistance from the society. And now it should be relaxed, and that's the fact, because with this distance regulation, actually last year the potential for onshore wind expired, so there are no more new projects in prepared under this condition that the 10H rule is applied. More or less 99% of the entire country is excluded with this 10H distance regulation. So it needs to be relaxed. It was announced that it will come. We wait for this in autumn.
Thank you, Joanna. Patrick?
Yeah, in Germany, there is a broad acceptance debate that is associated with wind onshore. Now, we have been looking at that very carefully, and in essence, it is a minority that is very vocal and very loud. The broad majority is kind of generally in favor of the energy transition. But the question they always have is what is in it for me if I have a windmill next to me? And that's why there has been the whole debate about a wind fee going from the wind park to the local communities so that they have monetary gains from wind parks in their region. And the current draft law for the Renewable Energy Act will have that in it. So we are making progress on that issue, I think. And and then we can progress again when it comes to wind, but also with large solar farms.
Thank you, Patrick. Alexandra, there's one question directly to you, and this concerns the role of the EU emissions trading system and potentially other instruments to drive forward the coal phase out in Europe. So how do you see that relationship between the EU ETS and other instruments steering or supporting the phase out?
Yeah, well, I think it is clear that the higher the carbon price under the EU ETS, the biggest the incentive for the sector to move towards lower carbon sources of electricity production. So clearly, with the higher the prices, the more accelerated this process of exiting coal as an energy source is becoming. In the future, we are planning that the EU ETS will remain the flagship and the main tool for decarbonization of the energy system. As you will see in the climate target plan that we will be publishing this week, there are some more ideas on that will be presented on how to extend it, this emissions trading system, into other sectors, as this was highlighted also in the European Green Deal. So I would say the ETS wasn't designed to phase out coal. As you probably maybe recall, back in 2008, 2010, the Commission was also strongly supporting demonstration projects of carbon capture and storage on coal-fired power plants. Back then, there was still, let's say, the option of somehow keeping coal in the mix while reducing the overall carbon footprint of the energy system. Well, since then we have seen over the last 10 years the dramatic decrease in the cost of renewables. So let's say the business case for these sort of solutions has clearly deteriorated. So I wouldn't call the ETS as a tool for phasing out coal, as a tool for reflecting the externalities, for taking into account the externalities, the costs to the society associated with CO2 emissions. Really the most competitive under this system option for generating electricity should be the most prominent one, and this is in the interest of European citizens, because in the end of the day, we would like European citizens to have the most competitive, let's say, access to the best priced electricity. And if this means that there is a lower share of coal in the system, well, that is the direction that we are taking. So maybe a little bit broader answer than was expected.
Thank you, Alexandra. Let's take one last question, and this is on security of supply. I think a very important issue in the debate. There are a number of other more technical questions which I didn't put to our panelists, and we will follow up on those questions in writing. Some of them are answered directly if you look into the study that is also available. Now, on security of supply, Finn Italy is asking, and I think this primarily goes to Joanna, you, and to Patrick, you. How do you see that developing under the current scenario and in an accelerated decarbonization scenario, security of supply can be maintained? Will there be enough transmission and reserve capacity? How is this being handled? Because simply pointing to installed generation and import capacity may not be enough. So how you see these debates on security of supply playing out? Joanna, perhaps you want to start.
I can start. It's certainly that what we have, let's say, analyzed in this analysis is still, it's not that the whole infrastructure, I don't know, electricity market design is there. So it's something which needs to be adjusted and developed accordingly to the political decision. So this is obvious. Currently, huge topic in Poland is, by the way, overall, let's say, resource adequacy, because Poland decided to implement capacity market, and it will run until 2025, which means that after 2025, many of the coal-fired power plants will make losses, and actually security of supply issue is something which is ongoing. So it's not that already now we have you know, reserve designs and grids built. By the way, the major challenge in Poland is distribution grids, because it's very old and do not see, let's say, see this renewables potential. But certainly, you know, this entire discussion needs to take place, how to assure security of supply in the longer term. And what needs to be developed, how to design electricity market. So we have now discussion whether we should come back to the scarcity pricing or design strategic reserves. Should they operate in the market or outside the market? So this is something which is very relevant, as you say.
Thank you, Joanna. Patrick?
Yeah, maybe first let me stress that the scenario that Aurora has modeled has in all situations sufficient capacity so that there is never a breach of security of supply, because the question kind of asks whether we have that in all situations. Yes, that was what the main objective of the modeling was. So even when there is no wind and no sun, there are security margins in all three countries so that there is security of supply in Poland, Czech, and Germany at any point in time. Now, that requires building some gas-fired power plants, because the more you phase out coal, you need gas power stations that are there when there's neither wind nor sun. And that then comes to the market design question that Joanna has asked. Do we need to enter a capacity market? I guess the debate will come up in Germany as well after or in the mid-2020s. One could stick to peak pricing and a reserve like we currently have, or switch to capacity markets. Maybe that would also be a regional approach would be best. So I guess that is then the political debate that we will have in the 2020s, whether or not we can have a joint approach there. Currently, obviously, with Germany going for peak pricing and Poland going for capacity market, this is a bit uncoordinated. Last sentence, it was said, asked whether there is transmission capacity needed. Well, I believe, Hans, you have modeled the TYNDP issues being taking place so that the grid is enhanced as planned in the European 10-year net development plan. And that's enough. Of course, more grids would lead to more cooperation, but it's not that without those grids, we see blackouts coming. So with that, I noted also, Matthias, there were lots of questions around security of supply. I would echo Alexandra that just transition is our major challenge, not so much the question whether the lights will go off.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm conscious of the time. We have normally 2 minutes left, and there will be a short leading closing of this webinar. Alexandra, from the Commission perspective, anything you want to add to what Patrick and Joanna just said, specifically when it comes to the European framework to ensuring security of supply, monitoring security of supply, and pushing for, let's say, a coordinated approach to this important matter?
Yes, well, the coordination across member states when it comes to security of supply is, as you probably know, something that we're already doing. We have presented as part of the Clean Energy for All Europeans proposals on how to do it even more effectively. Now, if you're talking about a more coordinated approach to tackling the issue of the future of lignite and coal, this is also something that we started with the Coal Regions in Transition Initiative and the Just Transition platform. We are hoping we can get back to meeting with the stakeholders in the regions as soon as possible. The Executive Vice President has committed to being part of this dialogue and visiting these regions. So this is very much something that we would like to do over the coming months and years. We are waiting for the borders to, let's say, for the COVID situation to settle again. So we will be a part of this discussion and creating links between national debates, wherever this can actually help accelerate the developments with the benefit for the communities, because this change is definitely coming. So we have to plan for it sufficiently in advance.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I take your last point actually in a broader message on just transition. Of course, it's important to have the numbers ready, but there needs to be a lot of dialogue on what the coal phase out means, very specifically for people in the different regions today dependent on coal mining and coal use. And this dialogue, as the study is showing, needs to start as soon as possible, if it has not yet already started. And I hope our discussion today has contributed and will contribute to the dialogue. That is an important one as part of the -55% raising ambition debate as well. And I would leave it here thanking the panelists, but also very much thanking our audience out there in asking very good questions. And we will follow up, I said, on some of the more technical ones in writing. I hand over to you. So thanks to all of you. I hand over to you, Nicola, and you will help us ending this webinar, in my understanding.
Yes, of course, you all need help with that. Thanks a lot for all panelists for attending and joining us till now, and also the audience, which is invited to, you know, applaud and thank you, or also mention if you didn't like some parts, you can use the chat or just write us emails afterwards. I will also publish the link to the presentation once more, the email address, you can contact us. And also, if you're interested in being updated on our events and latest studies, then why not subscribe to our newsletter? Other than that, let me think. There are no events on our website yet, but there will more be coming soon because we are planning some for October. So just check our website every now and then. And, the recording. Knowing my colleague, I can imagine it's going to be online already tomorrow. So you can rewatch parts of it if you like, or share it with other colleagues and friends interested. And other than that, I wish you a good rest of the day. And we'll be staying on the podium for a few more minutes, so you can pretend leaving the room now, going for a coffee or something. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.